beauty is gravity works everywhere, and the weight of water works everywhere, and it don't matter if you're in Nepal or in San Joaquin, it's all the same. It's a universal constant. You should base your systems on universal constants whenever possible, and only then, if you just didn't get the design right, can you sucker up to the cheapo way out, which is then brute force, pump it with a bunch of combusted fossil fuels. That's like the total easy out, pea-brain, short-term thinking. And I'm happy to have the interaction with y'all about me being theatrically facetious. Right? Elegance, this is about elegance. This is about observation. This is about protracted and thoughtful observation. Keep it simple, sweetheart. Right? And that's, so what he did then is, so here, there was a couple ways to spin this. One of them would have been looking at the landscape and saying, oh, wow, that's cool. Look at this little shoulder here. I'm going to take this water and I'm going to actually dig a little ditch off contour, and I'm going to put a pond up here. And I'm going to use this as my roof. This is my gutter, and here's my water tank. And then my demand for it is in my farm down here. And so there's a whole series of ponds fed by key lines. And the lower the gradient of that fall, the better. You want it to fall just enough to move the water, but not so much that it's erosive. And if you drop it too steep beyond being erosive, you lose the potential head, right? So in gray water systems and in pond systems, there's something called conservation of elevation. When you get to your house and you're trying to take that shower that's draining down into a little 2-inch black pipe, and you're trying to get that gray water through a branch drain that's 100% passive gravity fed, there's no pump behind this, you start every bit of plumbing, that how much it drops and where it turns in that 1/4 or 1/8 inch per foot, you start conserving elevation, so where it pops out of the house is as high as you can get that thing, so that you can move it across your seemingly flat yard 200 foot that way at an 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch per foot fall in a drain pipe. Right, plumber guy? Boom. Right? So you're going to do.
Otherwise, you're going to be putting in a tank and using a booster pump.
And then you're going to have to.
Ancient energy.
Right? And so if gravity will do it, this is about planning is best done in advance. You like plan that sucker out and not lose elevation at any cost unless you need it. It's whatever you can get away with, which is really 1/8 inch. Right? Over a 4-foot run, maximum of 1 inch of fall. Half inch would be good. Something like that. Right? What's a key line? So the key line was, here's the point, this is the line that emanates from the key point, and that's the key line. The gutter, the eaves trough off the harbor roof water system. It has a super shallow slope, just like when you're laying gutters out on a building and drain pipes. You want this to be the lowest slope you can. And I'll leave, Penny's got this book, this is me, got that. They have these systems in here. Let's see if we've got this picture. You'll have to go trip out over lunch at this thing. But this little wiggle is a key line that they took with a tractor in this landscape that looks crazy flat. And these things will fall 1 foot over 5,000. 1 foot of fall in a mile. Like imperceptible. And you're just moving. Have you seen Greening the Desert, the video on the web? Look that up. Jeff Lawton's work in Jordan called Greening the Desert. And you look at his system and he's got these very shallow key lines. In his case though, and in your case, because many of you, very few of you, unless you're supers, like own the whole watershed, have all of this, have the perfect thing, have the geometry, it's all good. What I have at my house is right next to my house, which happens to be over here in my little house, and up here was a leach field for some septic from over here, and they put an interceptor drain above the leach line because they're trying to dehydrate this. It's just a French drain in the ground with a porous pipe. that takes the underflow water and moves it away so that then you can shit in water and then have it go in the ground. Shit in the carbon cycle, don't shit in the hydrologic cycle. Right? Then the pipe goes perf pipe to here, perforated in a gravel drain, a French drain, wrapped with a fabric to keep the small stuff out. And a solid pipe comes down the slope and out here, and then it discharges. And right here's a slope, and that thing was just digging a gully, like big ass gully to the creek here that runs to where the salmon are. And I bought we moved in, and I'm in my little house, and I'm walking over here next to the house, and I'm like, why is there you know what a gully is, right? It's where the land has been, the dirt's been falling in, and it collapses and it moves uphill. Like if we had dry sand.
It's a cancer.
If you go to the beach onto a steep slope, if it's dry sand and it's unconsolidated, it's not wet, you can't get it to stand any steeper than what?
45 degrees.
Angle of repose, which is
45.
33.5 degrees. Right? Mount Fuji, volcanic stuff. So that it'll start migrating uphill if it's got a ton of water. And I'm looking at it going, why is there an 8-foot wide, 6-foot deep, 50-foot long gash in the earth that's been eroding when I have a little pipsqueak watershed like this big above here? It made no sense. If you see this, you're like, there's not enough chutzpah in the surface water to drive this without some other thing. So when it rained, I just walked up the dang thing until I found a 4-inch pipe busting out of some blackberries over here. And I'm like, what the hell is this pipe? And, you know, looking at the plans, it's like, oh my God, you guys they're dumping the drain from here out there. So my opportunity in this case is that I've got a pipe. It's as high on the landscape as I can manipulate. It's got a ton of water in it, highest on the land. That becomes my literal key point. Has nothing to do with this cutesy theoretical geology.
The quality of that water.
Quality's great. Clean, beautiful, because it's subsurface water. It's been pre-filtered. There's not a drop of sediment in this water. I'm not drinking it, but what I'm doing with it is intercepting it and putting it now into a ditch. I really don't have this steep a slope. Nice roots. Talk about surface area to volume ratio. We're taking it off. My pipe daylight's here, and I have 2 ditches that go off that are dead level on the contour. So a swale in permaculture, we're going to come over here and we're going to dig this guy out, and you're going to excavate that out, and you're going to build a little berm. In this case, I'm absolutely perpendicular to the fall line. Any skiers and snowboarders in the house? So if you're gonna work the bumps, you're skiing a fall line, you better keep the shoulder square and let the ass end wiggle, right? Come on, skier. Right? You're gonna, right? You stick in that, but the shoulders are square and the bottom end's going wiggle, 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 like so. And every time you go wiggle, wiggle, you're putting the brakes on just enough. If you really want to put the brakes on and stop on a slope, you got to turn perpendicular. If you're trying to get off, you take the thing all the way up to KT at Squaw, and now you want to work the chutes on the backside, and you need to get into them. If you've ever been a snowboarders especially, because you don't even have poles. I'm a telemarketer, so I just free your heel and your mind will follow. I'll walk mass over there. The snowboarders are all like, pushing with their big lunky board, right? They throw it on their back and they put some snowshoes on. But what you're trying to do, conservation of elevation. If you're all a backcountry skier or somebody who's looking to poach chutes, you find the lowest grade you can traverse, and you just set up that little traverse as low as you can to get around the corner to the cliff band, right? If for those of you who get, this is exactly how you work a mountain on skis, and it's exactly how keyline system works a slope. But at some point, if you're gonna stop, you have to go absolutely perpendicular to the fall line. And that's what a swale is. That's a contour. So, y'all know what a contour is?
Yeah.
You read a map, a line of equal elevation to itself along its entire length. So when you got that map out, that backpack, look at Penelope's hair. Cowgirl.
Welcome home.
If you got that map, and it's got these wiggly lines on it, and one of them says 20, it's 20 feet above sea level, and then the next one says 40, and the next one says 60, right? then it means that the elevational difference between this line and this line and this line, if I went out horizontally, the vertical difference between those lines on that map, known as the contour interval, in this case on this map is 20 feet. You have to read in the bottom of your little map. Somewhere on a map, if it has these squiggly lines, it will tell you this. And you map, different map depends on the scale of the map. It could be 100 feet, it could be 1,000, it could be 1 foot. You just have to know. And the cool thing is everywhere along that line is absolutely level to itself. And the coolest contour line you'll ever see is where? And I'm going to let you ponder this for not very long. Water seeks its own level. So if you got a flat body of water, like the little pond by over in Penny James's, when you get to go visit there, if it's a flat body of water, the shoreline of that pond is a contour line. It has to be. Until it turns off and starts running, and then rivers and creeks and things do something different. The ocean is, I mean, we've got tidal change and waves and all that stuff, but everything's based on sea level, right? How many feet above sea level? So if we're doing permaculture swales, which you'll see in the afternoon when you go on tour with Penny, those devices are ditches, if you will. They've been excavated out and the soil's been piled up to make a berm. So it's like a basin and a berm, which is a sine wave, right? So same, if you cut a cross section through a swale, it goes up and over and back up like that. And so you had one slope like so that was flat, that was just one angle to the south, sort of south. And we started digging this out, dig this out and form this berm, and dig this out and form this berm, right? And the ends are capped so it ain't running away. So now I took a single slope, and now I have a south slope, I have a high and dry loosened soil place, I have a north slope, I have a wet bottom, and I have another new south facing slope. So look at just the topographical diversity by just cutting out that system. But the bottom of this guy here, if it was done well, sited well, excavated well, would be equal in its elevation along its length. Water shouldn't flow in a direction. It's not like water drops into here versus the key line over here heading to our pond, where the water, and it's not just the water that went to here, we're also getting to pick up all this water too, right? Harvesting that for our pond.
And then also in that process of this through the key line, it's moving also in here by seepage and getting more in there than it would otherwise possibly, and spreading it out.
So either that seeps, or if you're not looking for a pond, then wherever that book went, then the next toy that gets a lot of airplay is this thing called a keyline plow. And you can pass this around. It's a fancy little plow that hooks to the back of a tractor, and it's got a very fancy set of tines. Imagine this is a sharp face. It's not knife sharp, but it's very sharp on the front edge and on the bottom with this little foot. And you can attach a series of them, and they're not, if you can see, you can pass this around and look at it. Just look at that photo and pass it around. Don't start flipping through the whole book. You're basically just dropping some knife blades through the sod in a rangeland setting and basically cutting through it and kind of popping it, and you're just fracturing, opening it up. So if you're not going to a pond, what you'll see is the keyline plow. So one half idea goes that way. The keyline plowing would be, we would just start plowing a series of these little, with the plow, kind of like half a herringbone, and if I went that way, right, you'll end up with this shape. Again, the fall on here is as low a slope as possible. So as the water hits here, it actually falls into these little grooves, this little corduroy that we've just added, micro little topography, and water starts moving in this direction. Right, so instead of it all concentrating into here, hitting this and that little ribbon of the creek running this way, it's falling in, you're spreading it, slowing it, and sinking it, and it's a rehydrated strategy that's trying to move it and then sink it and spread it into these areas where then you're going to grow grass for your rotational grass-fed beef operation, which is mostly what he was running, was cattle. Or if you're looking for farming and things, you're either trying to move it out there. The vineyard folks, the cool thing about a key line is that it falls off the contour at an equal slope to itself Whereas a contour line, what is if I come around here with a contour line, then I'm going to come out onto this ridge, and if I'm trying to literally stay to the same elevation, I got to go back in here, and then I'm out there, right, running all along this face, up that valley. The next one that I come, if the interval is the same, this very flat ridge, it's steep here, but then the line's going to get wider, right? Wider, but on this steep slope, it's going to come close.
So it has to be.
Because if this is 20 feet higher than this, if the slope of the land is flat, to drop 20 feet, you got to go further away. But if you come on the steep, so when you're staring at a map from above, those lines get close together. If I got to keep the space between my fingers the same, if it's steep, then they got it from above, right? They got to look like they're close together. And then where it's flat, they look like they're far. So the contours get all wonky to themselves. A Bolinas rice terrace. You've all seen those crazy photos, right? Just these terraces. The width of those rice paddies are not uniform, right? And so study those pictures. They're super cool. As far as elucidating the topography of that landscape, it's just like, oh my God, are you insane? Like, super cool. Those ridgeline ponds will be longer, and then the ones here. So contours wiggle, and if you're trying to do vineyards, and you want rows that are really straight, that have the same spacing and the width, because you're trying to maximize how many vines you can get in, and you want to keep the spacing the same because you bought a fancy Lamborghini tractor and Napa, and you got cab that's going for 100 bucks, right? And then key lines start looking really good because your vine row widths stay consistent because they're parallel to each other. And so it's not to say one is better than the other. Back to the point about it depends. There's times when contour provides the job you need, and there's times when moving water away at some angle does what you want. There's times that you move it away and then move it on contour. So all of these are just tools in the toolbox. If you understand topography and water concentration and flow, you can better apply a design that composes with the topography based on your goals versus you just imposing something upon it.
Why did you put the pond over here rather than right at your sweet spot?
It's a good idea. There are times when where the pond goes, if you're going to do a valley pond, and you're clear that you better than do everything you can do to reduce sedimentation up here, so that you just don't turn this into a catch basin full of mud, which can be a really good thing when it's needed. I'm all for it. If that's going to happen, then what you see the pond builders do is they'll put the dam wall will be back here, will be down here in such a way that when the pond is full around the rim, it backs up and the back end of the shoreline hits the key point there. Because this is too steep at this point, and you're not digging that out. And so you're actually trying, if you're going to do a pond like that, you would back it up, and then you'll see that the ponds oftentimes they have kind of actually more of a kind of a shape. They'll go like so. They'll end up looking like that. This point that heads back to the key point. They kind of have this wedge shape because we're trying to dam this area up. So you'll end up with a pond that looks like that.
Arable land, you lost some of your usable space there, didn't you? By
Not highest use water.
Well, but I mean, this was high. This pond is higher than that one, though.
So it's all up to what your landscape will allow. If you've got a pond site off to the side that's in a soils that isn't your prime ag soil, and you could move it there. Sometimes you don't have. I just took advantage of the fact that it happened to be where the key point was, and whoever, like I didn't sculpt this, you guys did, right? I just composed with what you all laid out, and it happened to be there's a sweet little nook right there that I could move water over to, which is what you may find in the landscape.
You're moving the least amount of soil when you put a pond in that second pond area.
Yeah,
You know,
this
you're concerned
dude,
about fuel use.
the amount of dirt you got to move to get a dam wall in a channel like that, this thing's big, and you don't get a lot from excavating. The steeper it is, you excavate out, you don't get to build a big dam. The flatter it is, every foot you take out, you don't get an actual foot. So Penny's totally right. The most soil the least change for the greatest effect,
Oh, yeah.
energy conservation and least dirt to move to yield the biggest hole in the ground, i.e. to store the most water, with the dam is somewhere out on these little ridges if you've got them. But sometimes you don't have those.
So could you have your pond over here and continue to have the natural water flowing down like as it would like a river going down that way and be able to
Get rid of this guy for a sec.
yeah, like would you still be able to
Instead of interrupting it totally, you mean, Coco?
yeah, like being able to harvest some of that water but still have it flowing down and like giving water to the rest of this valley and maybe people who live down here.
Sure. I mean, to the degree that, so is this device stealing water from here or not is a classic question. Whether it's like, a lot of times, I'm sure Penny and I both had this a ton. You're giving a talk and you talk about a roof water system and the Sierra Club will raise their hands like, you're stealing water from the salmon by putting it in that rainwater tank. And I'm like, no, the roof is stealing water by running it off very quickly, putting it in a ditch and taking it away. So putting the tank in there to catch it and be responsible for the roof by storing it and then you using less water from the watershed because you've stored the excess winter runoff in a tank so you're not pumping it out of the creek, that storage question. So the same thing is here. Depending on this landscape and how its history, if it's been overlogged or compacted, depending on the runoff and the rate of runoff and the amount of sediment, if we can slow some of that flow down that otherwise would have ripped down here and then made a big delta of mud down into the bay by storing it here and then getting it to leak, which is what this is doing. It's the slow it, spread it, sink it, seep it. Then we're elongating the presence of water in that system so it can weep and seep. And this little system, we're trying to ultimately figure out, can we get this creek to actually run longer in the season, later in the season.
Process,
it's a water storage and leakage system.
It's a bank account. But, you know, also, if that was a seasonal or perennial creek, you wouldn't be putting any dam in that, okay? But working above, like Brock was saying, above there and getting that the water to seep into that soil, then it'll seep out and those creeks will stay wet longer into the dry season. And eventually they might start springs start flowing again and creeks start staying maybe even wet all year, and depending on
Because the salmon are here. But if these little guys that eventually, you know, flow, if they don't leak, if the mountain doesn't leak, then, I mean, you've all had to have sat next to a river or a spring in October in the Mediterranean here 6 months later, if it's running and go, where's the water for this? How does that work? And if you're going to deforest this, cow it, plow it, pave it, and shoot it all off here and not let any of it go into the sponge, then it's no wonder that this creek dries up, and in many cases the actual larger stream or parts of rivers actually dry up because the sponge of the upland, imagine the surface area of the entirety of landscape. You can't dig enough holes on the ground to store more water than the soil and the geology and the rock will. So we're looking at this as a sponge, and this is a water harvesting, but not to hoard. It's trying to slow it down so that it will, I'm happy for it to get here. I just don't want it to all go there in December and January, right? I kind of want some there in October and November. So we're trying to stretch our water budget out by metering it through a infiltration campaign here that then weeps and seeps, is the theory. The State Water Board is partially on this concept.
Well, if you were mandating new construction projects to have some form of water storage as part of the permitting process, then you're reducing the pressure on the upper watershed, because in 20 years they're not going to need to build that bigger dam.
Absolutely. That's the thought. If you can...
Because East Bay Mud is fighting for that now. They want to get more water out of the McCollany River right now, and it's a huge issue. Because guess what? That's a huge area where people go to recreate, people who live there, you know, blah, blah, blah.
The $11 million water bond that will be put to you all voters here coming up has big macro storage built into that thing.
Really?
Temperance Flats and then sites as an offstream storage. So the Republican crew says, damn it, catch it, big ponds, because they want big pipes And who controls the spigot?
On corporate.
And are you in charge of the spigot? So who controls the spigot in these centralized systems versus we take charge of a decentralized, distributed, just like distributed energy, which we got to fight PG&E off this June on Prop 16. If you let PG&E win this war because it's a bullshit thing that they're trying to say that's about your right to vote, no. They're looking to lock their monopoly in. And you will not get to do photovoltaics or wind or geothermal or hard tidal. We could go on at lunch on that with you. But it's the same idea. Water, the more democratically distributed through a dispersed, on-site, localized,
Reasonable scales.
right? It's about scale. So this fish-friendly scale, watershed-friendly scale, democratically available, just scale, versus a big plug of concrete up in the head that only a few get access to the tap on. And I think that's really what we're talking about. And in resiliency, in the face of the uncertainty we talked about with global weirding, do you want to be sitting in the Superdome waiting for the folks to come save you after Katrina? Like, if you think that's where, put your faith into the folks who have control of the tap. I'm not a libertarian, but Carol calls me a preparanoid. Right? And I'm happy to feel the love when it's raining, go, oh, that rain tank's filling and that swale's filling and that pond is filling and the salmon will be happy, there's going to be water leaking October, and we have local resiliency built into our design that's growing food and permaculture, but this is the water piece. You had a thought, Lydia?
Yeah, I just want to jump in and say that, when you look at things on a large scale and you think about keyline, it seems like your average Joe in the suburbs with a little backyard can't really affect any difference, but you can with the swales and with the rainwater catchment tanks that allow you to use that water over a longer period of time, because you're infiltrating water right there where you live. And people who've dug a swale, like Toby Hemingway has a story, he dug a swale on a hillside near his house, and after the first year, he could see that the land below that swale was still green, and wildflowers that he hadn't seen ever on that slope were coming up because that water was still in the soil. It wasn't held back, it wasn't like, it was held back temporarily, but it wasn't stopped.
It wasn't in a vinyl lined pit.
No, it's slowly seeping down through the landscape, and on its way it can feed all these more organisms and all these more life processes. And you can restore springs and up the production of wells at the bottom of your property by doing these things at the top of your property. And you personally can have an impact and rehydrate the earth by just what you can do on your little space.
Well, and aren't there these swales out in the desert in Arizona that were built, many years ago, 60 by the Army Corps of Engineers or whoever it
Built
was.
at the Conservation Corps back in the 30s and built. Penny's been there and.
Yeah, and they have that video. Yeah, I mean it's amazing to see.
There's mosquitoes there.
What happened to
mature
the
cities
last? Yeah, it's
surrounded by
gorgeous.
desert. Yeah. So this stuff really works, and you can do it on a small scale. You can go out there with you and your shovel, and you can dig a swale that's this wide and this deep, and have a berm the same size, and you can just plant your veggies on the berm, and you'll see that's how they've set up most of the farm up here above the greenhouse and stuff. There's beds on contour. We'll see those in the afternoon. It's really powerful stuff. It's really easy to go get started and play with your shovel, and then you can even take your hose and check out what you've done. And this afternoon we'll show you how to lay out a level line and make a tool that you can do that with. That doesn't involve any technology. We'll play with some technology too, but this is really powerful stuff and super fun.
That one I talked about, that was the pipe next to the house that was making the gully from the interceptor drain above the leach field. So because I know the basic area and the length of the ditch and the amount of area to drain into it, it's pretty easy to make a fairly accurate estimate of how much water is going through that system, coming out of that pipe. And so it's featured in, well actually I think it's in this book, you can look it up there, Brad has a section on this one. 70 feet of hand-dug swale by permaculture students in a course, right? Paying me to dig ditches in my place, right? Stack functions. In 2 different workshops, figured out. That thing alone, we had, right after we did it, we had a huge rain year that flooded out the Russian River. It was the big New Year's flood of 05 or something like that, right? Big one, right? And so I was able, this little system only ever topped the spillway at the height of that flood during that event. Otherwise, we got 92 inches of rain that year. Wow. And so I discounted 12 inches off the get, just for assuming there's lots of loss and infiltration. and did the math on it, and that pipe let out 600,000 gallons of water that season, of which 100 or 99% of it went in the ground there, except for that one part where it failed in that big storm. All of it was in the ground, and now that whole area below there's the same thing as Lydia just talked about that Toby's seen. Our annual withdrawal at OAC is 50,000 gallons a month from our groundwater well for potable water for the whole community in the workshops and trainings and lots of folks. Right, so 50K a month times 12, 600K. So that 70-foot of ditch dug on contour from a 4-inch pipe put equal amount of water into the shallow groundwater in that one storm that we extract for our entire potable groundwater extraction. It's not the same aquifer. I'm not saying this gallon went here and later I get to pull it out. But we can begin to balance our water budgets that if you're going to take water out of the ground or springs, then pattern your landscape so that you're contributing, you're investing more of those liquid assets into the piggy bank of the planet and the watershed than you're taking out in your withdrawal slip called your tap.
But isn't one of the like the issue you're bringing up, one of the issues is water is being taken out in places where it's not being put back, like the Errol Sea was a great example or whatever. So those
or the
closed
Ogallala
watersheds,
aquifer.
right, 1,000-year cycle, and
No,
then pump
Lord